Yes, I am here with Madison Farkas. She is a journalist and an author. How are you, Madison?
I'm good. How are you this evening?
I'm doing all right. The weather is getting better, so is my mood.
Of course, yeah.
Mhm. I would like to begin by asking, when's the last time you went on vacation?
Oh, geez. I think it was January, February of 2019. I went to Mexico
Wow.
for a yoga retreat, and
Oh,
I have
wow.
not been anywhere since.
Mhm. I've neither been to Mexico nor been in a yoga retreat. So tell me how'd that go?
Oh, it was great. It was very relaxing. We did yoga a couple of times a day. It was in a villa right by the ocean, and we did a whole bunch of extra stuff. So like horseback riding, and we went and did surfing lessons, and it was really fun. I miss the chance to just go and relax somewhere that isn't my living room.
Mhm. Oh yeah, I mean it's COVID season, so everyone is
Mhm.
looking forward to a vacation anytime soon. What's your ideal vacation spot?
There's a couple places on my list I haven't been to yet. I actually haven't been to mainland Europe yet.
Hmm.
I've been to the UK, but not to Europe, like France, Italy, a couple of those places. I speak both languages, so I want to go somewhere where I can speak the language, and it's very rusty, but I want to give it a shot.
Hmm. Awesome. Yeah, I've never been to Europe either. I heard the UK is nice.
It was so much fun. Yeah, it was a blast. I did a field school there in university, so mostly
Hmm.
Scotland, but we spent a few days in London as well.
Hmm. We're gonna talk about your little book here. It's called
Yeah.
The Tree, and tell me about the origin of this little text that I've got here.
Yeah, so it was actually a bedtime story that my dad told me when I was very, very young. I don't think I was even three yet. My
Hmm.
parents were at a house party and the hosts didn't have any kids. So it got to be my bedtime and there were no picture books to read.
Oh
And
wow.
of course, heaven forfend, tiny me should have to go to bed without a story first.
Hmm.
So he basically had no choice but to just come up with something on the spot, which is what he did.
Oh wow.
And we ended up with the three tree, which is pretty much survives in its pretty close to original version in the printed form, but it spread to my little brother, and then to our cousins and other kids in my family's circle of friends, but has a very long history of oral retellings. That's sort of where it got its start.
Hmm. Oh yeah, that's incredible. So you grew up in Calgary, Alberta, yeah?
I did, yes.
Yeah. How was your childhood, may I ask?
Very happy, honestly.
Oh,
I
that's
mean, I
great.
think part of the reason I wrote a kid's book is because I have very fond memories of reading and being read to as a kid. And I think that's what inspired a lifelong love of reading that I honestly couldn't imagine my life without now.
Hmm.
So I think the three tree in its printed form is very much sort of my childhood immortalized. That's
Hmm.
actually me on the dedication page.
Yes. And yep, that's you. And
Mhm.
do you know how old you were when this picture was taken?
Oh, geez. I can't have actually been much later. I don't think maybe two or three at the most. I mean, I clearly don't remember, but yeah, it was very, very young. It was before my brother was born for sure, and he's 3 years younger than me.
Mhm. Yeah. So how many siblings you have?
Just the one, yeah, one younger brother.
Yeah, I have one myself. He's 6 years younger. He's still back in Hanoi, Vietnam right now. He's in high school, and he hopes to come here, among other things.
Yeah, no, my brother's still out in Alberta. He pretty much just climbs mountains all day is what he's into. So it's the ideal spot for it.
Hmm. Yeah, it's quite funny because you're the older sister, and I've never had the opportunity to either be an older sister or have one. So, what was that like? What's that like?
We were really close. I think, and we still are pretty close. I think sort of the nature of a sibling relationship is you alternate between help me hide the body and don't even breathe in my direction, are sort of the two
Mm.
extremes.
Oh yes.
So when we weren't one, we were the other. But he's great. He's got a great sense of humor. He's very funny, and
Hmm.
I haven't had the chance. I mean, he lives pretty much on the other side of the country and has for several years now. But so yeah, very funny person when we get together.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I think it goes with sibling relationships. It's always the case that the younger one is a more extroverted one, as it in my case.
Yeah, I don't know if extrovert is the word I would use. I mean, I certainly consider myself more of an introvert than an extrovert. Um,
Mhm.
but I mean, my brother certainly got away with things that I would never have been allowed to do. So
Oh
that there
yes,
is a little bit of younger sibling privilege there.
oh yes, that is definitely the case. Hmm. So what does your father do?
He's retired. He worked for the city of Calgary for many, many years, but he's been retired for I think about 6 years now.
Hmm.
So he does a lot of projects around the house. He makes beef jerky as one of his hobbies. He's got a lot of hobbies. It's the
Hmm.
beef jerky. He sells stuff on eBay, so he's always like trawling through thrift stores to try and find. Oddly, VHS tapes are one of the most popular things that people want on eBay.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, he's got a lot of little projects like that he works on.
All right. Yeah. I've been recently starting to collect like VHS tapes. I got a VCR from someone, so I just thought, why not? And after all, they're pretty cheap to buy.
If you can find something that plays them, yeah, yeah.
Oh yeah, I do. So when's the last time you get to see your family in person?
My parents were able to come out to Ontario last summer.
Hmm.
Before COVID ever happened, they had planned a cross country road trip that, with the restrictions at the time, they were still able to do, and they sort of they had to make some alternate arrangements, and there was lots of getting tested and lots of like
Hmm.
masking, obviously, and all of that stuff going on. But I'm very thankful that they were able to get out here, because otherwise it would have been Christmas of 2019 would have been the last time that I saw the rest of my
Hmm.
extended family.
I see. Yeah. Mm, I do consider yourself a bit luckier than me because it took a lot more considerable distance for my mom and dad to actually get here, and the flight situation over there is too complicated because of the virus and stuff, and
Oh, of
neither
course.
can I return.
Yeah, Vietnam isn't exactly driving distance.
No, no, it isn't. The last time I saw them in person was summer of 2019. I finished my what was it? My second year of university. So yeah. Uh, you graduated from Mount Royal University in
Yes.
Alberta. Yeah, Calgary, Alberta, obviously. Uh, what was the worst part of doing that university thing?
I mean, I had a really good university experience overall.
Okay.
Worst part was probably just the lack of sleep in general.
Uh huh.
Yeah, I took like a full course load pretty much every semester.
Mm-hmm.
And there were always a lot of, I mean, we didn't generally have exams in my degree, because in journalism, it's more like either like assignments or articles or big
Mm-hmm.
projects, papers in a lot of my other classes, more so than exams. But it was a lot of work. And there's sort of the saying goes that you can pick any two of sleep, a social life, and good schoolwork in university. So I think it was the sleep that got sacrificed for me.
Yeah. For me, it was the social life. Yeah. I not that I didn't try. I think I did quite good at school. I'm still doing pretty good at school, but I think, of course, I sort of paid the price of not being that successful as a socialite, as a social person. So for my brother is a lot more, I guess, successful in that front than me. He likes doing stuff with people, while I like to stay in and either do a movie or a book or a piece of music.
Mm.
And recently, I've picked up the hobby of talking to people on the screens like this.
Yeah,
Uh,
I mean, in a world where that's pretty much how all socialization happens, I mean,
mhm.
you come by it honestly.
Oh yeah. Do you miss the pre-COVID life?
Of course, yeah. Like everybody's just done with this. Everybody wants it to be over. Like
Hmm.
I've got my first vaccine appointment next week, and
Yeah, that's great.
as much as that's not gonna like it's not gonna immediately revert life back to how it was pre-COVID,
Hmm.
like everybody's just over this.
Hmm.
And I do have to wonder if we had been a little bit stricter with the lockdowns more towards the beginning, like we've done a lot of sort of piddling and effective semi-lockdowns over the course of the last year and a bit
Hmm.
that are the reason that we're all still dealing with this.
Oh yeah. And so, what brings you to this rather lovely city of Peterborough from Calgary, Alberta?
I moved for a job. Yeah,
Hmm.
I'm still actually with the same company. It's a full-time job that
Hmm.
it was actually right after I graduated university. And of course, the first thing everyone is doing around that time is job searching.
Hmm.
So it was a bit of a relief to finally get something full-time and stable after probably a year and a half of
Hmm.
unpaid or barely paid internships.
Oh yeah, I can understand that. How long have you been here?
Geez, this will be 4 years now. Yeah, a
Mm.
little over 4 years.
Hmm. So that would be 2017.
Yes, yeah, 2017. It was February that I moved. So right in the dead of winter, when I will say Peterborough
Wow.
is not at its finest in February, but
Hmm. I moved here around the beginning of September, because just when the school year began, 2017, the same year as you.
mm,
Um, I was my 18th birthday would be next month, the 18th of October. It was a surreal experience, obviously, because I haven't been abroad by myself before. I've went on a few trips with my dad. Uh, so uh, it's it brings back a lot of like weird memories because here's the thing. I don't know if you, I think you fly more than I am, but I always have like this weird mixture of feelings when I go to the airport and I and wait for, say, a my plane to depart, or someone I know to come, to come out the arrival gate, say my my parents. It's a mixture of like anxiety and dread and hope and fear, and I felt that most profoundly when I was in Toronto's airport terminal the first time that I arrived in Canada. It was late August, and the flight arrived like it was way past midnight there, and um, I didn't manage to find like a I did manage to book a hotel room there, miraculously, and I didn't get too much sleep, but I slept soundly. The next day, I had to return to the airport to meet the Trump representatives, but it was a finely surreal day.
yeah, I mean, Calgary to Toronto is a lot. I mean, that's not nearly as long a flight as coming from Vietnam, but
Hmm.
it was a very weird experience because I don't think I'd ever flown by myself at that point.
Hmm.
And I basically just came out here with two big suitcases full of pretty much just all my clothes and nothing else,
Hmm.
because the way we'd done it was the company that I worked for was having a conference in Toronto. So that's where I came into first. And then later on that summer, my dad would drive out and bring like my furniture and the rest of my stuff. So I was pretty much living out of a couple of suitcases for like 5 months
Hmm.
until all of the rest of my stuff got here. But like I'd never lived anywhere but with my parents until that point.
Oh yeah, um, yeah. Independence can be like a mix thing, like a mixture of things. Like, um, I remember when I was around 16 or 17, that was all I wanted to move out, not just
Mhm.
out the house, but out the country, because it's I didn't have too many good memories there. And when I found out that, I could have this opportunity to study abroad, and I just did my best to grab it.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, that's why I went to Scotland.
Hmm.
Again, a smaller scale for sure,
Hmm.
but that's like travel is never a bad thing, and seeing other parts of the world is never a bad thing.
Hmm. Yeah. Was there a job offer there in Scotland? Like, did you go there for like work related reasons?
No, no, that was just a field school. So that was just for
Ah,
six
I see.
weeks.
I
It
see.
was, yeah, it was studying sustainability in national parks. So we did a
Hmm.
lot of comparisons between Banff National Park in Alberta and Cairngorms National Park in Scotland about like
Wow.
forestry management and animal management and sustainability and that kind of stuff. But I mostly wanted to see the University of St. Andrews, which we actually did spend a couple of days there and were able to go to some lectures there, which was really cool. It's very Hogwarts.
I see. Yeah.
Yeah, we actually took.
Yeah, which
Oh, go
brings
ahead.
me to obviously the Harry Potter question. What Hogwarts house would you consider yourself to be in, and what's your favorite Harry Potter book?
Well, I'm definitely a Gryffindor, or at least so multiple tests online have told me. But as far as my favorite book, it tends to be a toss-up between 3 and 4. 3 is probably the most technically proficient and technically well-crafted, but 4 just has a lot of my favorite moments in it.
Right. That would be Goblet of Fire.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, I
Yeah,
actually run a blog in my downtime devoted to analyzing Harry Potter. So if you got a question,
Oh, wow.
I am an unexpected font of obscure Harry Potter knowledge.
Okay. What's an example?
Pardon me?
What's an example of a
Oh,
obscure piece of Harry Potter trivia?
Harry Potter trivia specifically.
Yeah.
It's more, it's less trivia. I mean, like the stuff that I know about Harry Potter is the stuff that anyone who has read the books would know. I just have a bit of an eidetic memory about it, and I've never entered a Harry Potter trivia quiz that I have not won. Put it that way.
All right. Yeah. Um, one of the things I've always asked myself is that so the game of Quidditch, and they're like the goal is to catch that little golden winged ball. They call it the snitch. So
Yeah,
if you
I'm
catch
familiar.
that, then you won the game. So what's the point of like the getting all of those like bigger brown balls, they call them the quaffles, into the hoop? So the
See,
whole point is just to catch the golden ball.
that's actually a very interesting question because I definitely think that Quidditch is a badly designed game. People often ask me like, you call yourself a Harry Potter fan, why do you criticize it so much? And like that's part of the fun of it for me. And I do think like there's lots of valid criticisms that can be levied at Harry Potter. A minor but still sort of nagging one is the question of Quidditch and like why is catching the snitch worth so many points? I think it should be worth no points at all. It still ends the game, but it's not worth any points. So that puts way more emphasis on the chasers and getting, as you mentioned, the quaffle into the hoops and scoring that way. But then if the snitch is worth no points, then it's not automatically guaranteed that whoever catches it is going to win the game. So you'd have to be much more strategic about when you caught it if it ends the game, but it's not worth any points.
Oh yeah. And also, Dumbledore's overt bias towards the Gryffindor house kind of ruins the story a bit for me.
See, I'm a bit of two minds about that one because yes, as much as it would suck for, and I'm assuming you're talking specifically about snatching the house cup out from underneath the Slytherin's noses in the first book. Yeah. So that on the surface, there's a progression that you go through as a fan of like, when you first read it as a little kid, you're like, oh, yay, great for Gryffindor. They won, like, stuff those mean Slytherins. And then as you grow up, you start to see, well, what would the Slytherins feel about this? I'm sure they weren't pleased that the Great Hall was all decorated in their colors and all of a sudden it gets snatched out from under them. But here's my thought about that. Yeah. So Snape, as we know, unfairly awards Slytherin points at every possible opportunity. So while it's still kind of a dick move on Dumbledore's part to make them think that they've won and then award Gryffindor a bunch of last second points, the points that they won by were probably largely due to Snape awarding them too many points and penalizing the other 3 houses too much. So maybe if Snape had not been a factor, Gryffindor would have won anyway.
Great.
I mean,
yeah,
probably not that particular year because they had so many points taken away from them for various circumstances. But I think they would have been a lot closer than 372 points or whatever behind that they were if Snape had been more fairly awarding and removing points throughout the year.
All right. Yeah. We could continue on this Harry Potter train for days, but
Oh
I
yes, very easily.
I would like to return to your profession of expertise, which is journalism. Obviously, you are one, and you've been one for a few years at least. And what is the one piece of advice you would give, say, people who are either students of the profession or someone who's just starting on his or her job?
I mean, I
Yeah.
haven't been working in hard journalism for several years now. My full-time job now is sort of journalism adjacent, but like it's not, I'm not working in a newsroom right now.
Hmm.
But I think the best piece of advice that was given to me when I was working on my degree, a lot of us sort of in first year came into the program with the misconception of sort of journalistic objectivity, in that like you have to
Hmm.
present both sides fairly. And the way it was put to me was that if one person tells you it's raining and the other person tells you it's sunny, your job is not to report both sides of the story, quote unquote, it's to look outside and see what the actual truth is.
Hmm.
Like, and I found that through a lot of my article projects while I was in university, is that like every story has a hero and a villain. Like it may not be in such extreme terms, and it may not be like there's an objective bad guy in every story, but when
Hmm.
you tell a journalistic story, like sort of by the nature of storytelling, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, like you have to have a protagonist, and that makes it very clear in terms of how you structure that article and who your sources are, who you think the protagonist is.
Yeah. Yeah, it is a form of storytelling, isn't it?
Yeah, no,
Uh,
absolutely. That was one of the things that I struggled with most when I was in university, is because I tended to focus on like longer term, bigger scale, more deeply researched stories. So I was doing
mhm,
2,000 word articles that required 10 sources and a month of research, which in the journalism world is basically a novel. Um,
mhm.
and I tended to get bogged down in the weeds of like, well, like what order do I say this information so that it is compelling and interesting and also comprehensible to somebody who doesn't know anything about it?
All right. Uh, how would you describe what you are currently doing now? You said you're not working in a newsroom, so your house, obviously.
Yeah. So that's I said journalism adjacent. It's neighborhood magazines.
Hmm.
So we have them all over Canada and the States. They're monthly magazines that get delivered to a particular community, and they have the main story is a feature on somebody who lives there. And then there's also like a calendar of events, and there's local contributed articles. There's like a kids
Hmm.
corner with crafts and games and things. So definitely storytelling, not quite journalism. And I'm not doing it myself
Hmm.
either directly. I used to write for a couple of the magazines individually, but I've moved on to the company's head office,
Hmm.
and I'm more doing management stuff with like hiring people and helping people work through problems, training people, making sure that people aren't putting stuff in the magazines that's going to get us sued, which tends to be a bit of an issue. But yeah, that's what I spend my days doing.
Let's see. Yeah. So your other job, obviously, is being an author. With this, would you consider this to be your debut piece of writing,
I mean,
like
technically,
a
yes.
book? Yeah.
Yeah, and technically, yes. I mean, it is my first published book. So I guess in that sense, yes,
Hmm.
it is my debut as an author. But I mean, it's really more of a family and personal project than it is like I'm not
Hmm.
trying to become like the next New York Times best-selling children's author. I mean, that's that would be great.
Hmm.
And I'm certainly like working on getting the name out there. I've been promoting it. I've been
Hmm.
working on that kind of stuff, but I don't necessarily think children's picture books are where I'm going to end up as an author. This was very much, I found myself facing an abundance of free time last year during lockdowns, and I wanted to do something for my family and particularly my dad because it was his story, and get that into a form that will survive
Hmm.
after people aren't telling it out loud anymore.
So, did your dad get a chance to have a copy of this?
Yeah, actually, good timing. He just got his copies in the mail this afternoon.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. Well, I'm guessing you do look forward to what he thinks about it.
Yeah, he sent me some comments. He was really pleased with it. Yeah, like I said,
Mm-hmm.
it's almost more for him than it is for me because I never wanted to obfuscate the fact that it was his story originally. So I was
Mm-hmm.
very conscious as I was working throughout the entire process of like, I want this to be something my dad will like.
All right. Yeah. So now that you've moved into the realm of fiction storytelling, what kind of stories would you like to, to write, to author, to tell?
We actually have one on the go right now. My partner and I are co-writing an adult fantasy novel.
Mm-hmm.
So that's, I think we're at roughly 50,000 words now. So probably about halfway to where we want it to be.
Oh wow.
But yeah, it's a queer coming of age story, and it's a very millennial story that's
Mm-hmm.
really sort of focused on the issues that our generation faces, wrapped up in a fantasy novel.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah.
Yeah.
Have you gotten a working title yet?
We haven't really we call it patchwork, but that's very much a
Mm-hmm.
working title. The way I've always written is the title is the last thing that you do. So that's,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that's probably not what the actual title is going to be.
Right. Yeah. So here's a double whammy. Why do you write, and how do you write?
I write because I need to. Like I've sort of
Yes.
always felt
Yes.
I've always felt a compulsion to write. I mean, I've been writing terrible fan fiction since I was like 13 years old. Like
Mm-hmm.
I was always coming up with stories. I've always had like a passion and an interest in the technical craft of storytelling and writing, because I think that's something that casual readers don't really think about. I think not as much as they should. The technical craft that goes into the books they enjoy. Like most people will read a book and think either that was great or I didn't like that, but I don't know if they have an appreciation for like how much work goes into story structure and planning and character development and like down in the weeds sentence construction and where do I put that comma and should I use this word or that word. Like writing is hard, um, and I love it and it's what I want to do with my life, but it's hard and I don't think people talk about that enough.
Oh, yeah. I like you. I do aspire to be a writer. I read a lot more than I write, but I and also school stuff. I still have to write essays and such. But um, I think I differ a bit in that I like to do plays. I like to
Oh
write
yeah.
plays.
Mhm.
Um, one of the mild criticisms I have with J.K. Rowling and the Harry Potter series is that it's really great at world building. She's a fantastic builder, but the story is it's not that not that fascinating. Some of the supporting characters are really great, but I don't really get the sense that Harry Potter is like the most valiant kid that everyone needs to worship. I mean, his whole character is based on the fact that he's beloved by everyone, and anyone who doesn't like him is automatically considered kind of a dick.
See,
Um,
I don't know necessarily if I would agree with that. I mean,
okay, yeah.
I'm sure it's different for people who didn't. I mean, like I've been reading Harry Potter since I was 5, so I certainly have a not small amount of nostalgia bias.
Mhm.
But in terms of like the actual character of Harry himself, I think a lot of the reason why people sort of like imagine him as a plank of wood
Mhm.
is they're getting the movies confused with the books.
Hmm.
Um, there are lots of big differences between the movies and the books, and like Harry is a sassy and sarcastic little shit in the books, and
Hmm.
that never really translated to the movies.
Yeah, yeah, I do remember that as well. I know that Hermione would make a better protagonist, like uh, a better central character. But also I have a I do I am skeptical of this notion that there must be heroes and villains in the story, because I some of my favorite plays feature people who are neither, or who have a mixture of good and bad qualities, and they have to go through all of that. Say, you don't really encounter heroes or villains in the place of Chekhov. You just have people and who value different things, and have led who have lived lives guided by this false notion of themselves or the world around them, and then at the end they get really disappointed because they learned that they were wrong, but they lost everything. And that also reminded me of this play by Bill Naughton called Alfie. Have you heard of it? There's a movie starring there's one movie starring Michael Caine in the 60s, and there's a remake starring Jude Law. So Alfie is this sort of like Cockney accented British man who lives his entire life being very degrading to women, but he also, goes out with many, many, many of them, and uh, and he encounters a series of incidents involving himself and the women he had been with, and at the end he has this powerful monologue saying that, well, I've had all the women in the world, all the pretty ones and the not so pretty ones, but I haven't got any peace of mind. And if you don't have that, then you have nothing. Sorry, I couldn't imitate that Cockney accent, but that's essentially what he says.
Yeah.
And
That, but
and,
with
and
rhyming slang.
yes, and there's that. Um, the plays of Shakespeare also has an impact on me, because sometimes the person who you really should despise happens to be the main one, like say Macbeth.
And
So
I was gonna say Macbeth. Yeah.
and and it's not a and obviously you don't really root for the guy, but when as you witness the journey from his bottomless greed to his very bloody demise, it gives you a glimpse of the darker side of human nature.
Yeah,
And
and I think
yeah.
in drama in particular, the nature of conflict that is not, I mean, if we want to go back to grade 7 English class, the
Mhm,
like man versus man, the like versus
mhm,
nature versus self
mhm,
versus technology versus society. It's not necessarily that every story needs a hero and a villain, but every story
mhm.
needs conflict.
Yeah.
And some of the most interesting conflict that I agree is really well explored in drama
Mhm,
is generally versus self. Like what
mhm,
people's own flaws and people's own shortcomings are what is getting them, is what is getting in the way of them being able to live the life that they want.
mhm. Um, what would be an example of that story that you are really impressed by, that you really resonate with?
In drama,
Yeah. Or any type of fiction, movies and TV shows and such.
interesting. Okay, so a versus self conflict.
Yeah.
I mean, you mentioned Macbeth. That's certainly a
Hmm.
big one. Like, we talk about self-fulfilling prophecy a lot
Hmm.
in that play, where like if Macbeth had never been told that he would be king one day, he would have been perfectly happy with the life that he already had.
Hmm.
I think there's a lot of that's actually sort of on a lesser scale than Macbeth. That's a character arc that I find really compelling, is characters who could have had a happy life if they had made different choices.
Yeah.
That's actually something that we're trying to explore with the villains and the antagonists in
Hmm.
our fantasy novel that we're writing, is like all of these people who are antagonists could have been
Hmm.
happy if they had made other choices. And the reason that they are antagonists is because of their own choices.
Yeah. As a kid, I watched this cartoon show, Phineas and Ferb. It's a
Oh
Disney
yeah,
program,
yeah, yeah. It was
and
a little bit after my time, but I'm familiar.
And it's always very interesting. The of course the alleged antagonist, Dr. Doofenshmirtz, is
Mhm.
always a more interesting guy because he goes into his backstory and how he as a kid he met all of the worst, the most horrible things that happened to him, and that sort of like brings him to this kind of person that he is. Like he calls himself an evil scientist, but really he makes contraptions that constantly failed, and who who, who is a divorced man, and he spends all his alimonies making these weird contraptions, and I think I've always thought that's and this is very much exemplified in John Milton's Paradise Lost, that the bad guys are always the more interesting ones, but the good guys, obviously they have they have better values.
See, if your good guy is boring, then that is the failing of you as the writer and not them as the character.
Hmm.
Because, like, villains, yeah, like villains can be interesting. Like, I stand Loki as much as anybody else does. But evil is easy. Like, choosing to be a villain, if we want to use the rather simplified terms of hero and villain, like it's just as interesting, if not more, to me to see a person struggle with how to maintain their values and how to how to be a good person in a world where that becomes more and more difficult, where like values are getting compromised and the world is messy and violent and complicated. Like, how do you stay a good person? Because it's much easier in a lot of cases, especially in fiction, to just say, well, I wash my hands of this notion of being a good person altogether, and I'm just going to do what I want.
I think the I prefer Thanos to Loki, so that's just the first. Uh, for much of his obviously genocidal impulses and planning, his motives are understandable in some ways, and I've learned that perhaps I gravitate to different kinds of stories than you do. That um, you know, a person is not bad by by default. There's a mixture of obviously personal choices and environmental factors that drives him to where he is, and this goes the same with history, in that the people who we see as bad, they don't generally see themselves as bad. They see themselves as either servants of a higher value, and obviously that value comes into those sets of values come into conflict with our hero says, and it is obviously a battle of values to see which one would gravitate towards the audience more.
Yep. No, I mean, I can't say that Thanos's values had much merit. I mean, he's very much sort of he's the type of villain that, like, in theory, we're very much meant as an audience to come away with it thinking, but Thanos was right. Thanos had good motives, but like he didn't solve the problem in doing what he did. Even if you take it as correct that like worlds are overpopulated and there's not enough resources, like, one, I take issue with the way he particularly framed that dichotomy in the
Hmm.
first place, but also the solution to we have too many resource consumers and not enough resource production is not to eliminate the resource consumers.
Yeah.
And not only the resource consumers, but as the writers later clarified, half of the living resources too.
Hmm.
Like, when he destroyed half of all life in the universe, he destroyed half of the cows and the grass and the plants and all of those other. So like, you just created the same problem on a smaller scale, and I don't think that was sort of made clear, that wasn't a factor that we were meant to criticize in the movie itself.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm not saying that they have good motives, because if they have good motives, they would obviously the good person, the good people, but their motives are obviously understandable, and and in some ways reflective of, say, some of the, darker aspects of human nature, as I've mentioned. And obviously, Thanos' plan wouldn't work because over time, people and all other living things would repopulate themselves.
Mhm.
So there's
And he
that.
didn't even make that big of a dent either. I mean, if we look specifically at Earth,
Mhm.
population growth, like let's say the problem could be solved by eliminating half of the human population, which is not true and also not what he did. But as a thought experiment, let's say that was the case. Like, even if that were true, all he did by eliminating half of the population because of the exponential growth we've experienced over the last several decades, he would have popped us back to like the 70s,
Mhm.
which was not going to solve any problem, even if he hadn't also eliminated the resources.
Yeah, that's food for thought right there. um, so we've had a interesting conversation before about hipsters and things that popular things that people hate. I think a person like a normal person would find, you know, would find certain popular things, you know, not very not hateful, but you know, doesn't gravitate towards any of them. Uh, do you have your picks on the things that are popular that you find yourself saying, why are those things popular? And I'm not
I
getting
mean,
into them.
for current stuff, not as much. I mean, I went through an I hate Twilight phase,
Mhm.
but
Same here.
like everybody else did. But that was
Mhm.
more, I later discovered, internalized misogyny than, I mean, Twilight has a lot of flaws, 100% it does. And I've written several essays to that effect, but
Mhm.
the pure unadulterated hatred of anything to do with Twilight, as a matter of course, was definitely more internalized misogyny than it was
Mhm.
me having valid criticisms of the text at the time.
Mhm. Yeah. Tell me more about this this notion, internalized misogyny. Um, forgive me for saying this, but I heard this being spoken a lot in college campuses, and I always find that silly. Um, I mean, you can obviously you can dislike a an intellectual artistic property starring women while liking others. I mean, that's just how they are. It all depends on how good the story is told and how good the character is, whether they're male or female. I I did went through. It wasn't too long. It wasn't that long, but I I often find I used to find the book series 50 Shades of Grey
Oh yeah.
unappealing, but later on I found that because it's not meant to be read by people like me, like people like me who wouldn't find all that appealing. Like there is a subgenre of say erotic fiction that is meant for women, and women would like that thing and those things, and I'm not. So
Yeah, there's definitely merit in like recognizing that you are not the target audience of a particular property, and therefore your opinion about it matters less than the opinions of the people it is actually targeted at. But with the case of Twilight specifically versus 50 Shades of Grey, I mean, 50 Shades of Grey was Twilight fan fiction first, so
mhm,
they are deeply intertwined.
mhm,
Um, with Twilight more so, I think the reason I use the term internalized misogyny there is, I mean, the phrase that gets tossed around a lot as sort of the exemplifier of internalized misogyny is when you hear women saying, "I'm not like other girls," or especially in fiction, if you see a female character who was written by men saying, "I'm not like other girls," as if that's a thing that's supposed to be admirable.
mhm,
Like, you are lifting yourself up, or the writers are lifting the character up to the detriment of other women, and that is something that's never going to be healthy.
mhm,
But particular in my personal experience with Twilight, I mean, like, I was the exact age that it was marketed to when it first came out. I read it in junior high like everybody else did. I loved it.
mhm.
And then I
Okay.
started to hear things about it. And I started to hear what were like kernels of valid criticisms about Twilight, but I think I swung too hard in the opposite direction,
Mhm,
where I started to like get really personal about Kristen Stewart for no reason. and like the internalized misogyny comes from like, this is a thing that is about women and for women, and therefore it must inherently be bad. And even if no one was outright saying that, that's sort of where those opinions come from. Like anything
Yeah.
anything that is targeted at women or that women like has less merit than the stuff that men like.
Yeah. There is obviously some people who exhibit those, you know, traits, and of course, it's the online world, so uh, they often gather around in a flock, and they find validation in crowds and whatnot. Um, it's funny. There is a whole subreddit dedicated to mocking the people who say that they are not like other girls. Most of them are often girls, and they they think that they think that there are certain things that a girl or a woman stereotypically likes, and because they like certain different things that they're not one of them, and
Yeah,
that's
like that
just
whole concept is like that what people are making fun of in that subreddit, and that whole concept is based on internalized misogyny of like the reason people are saying that, or like the women the reason the women in those posts are saying what they're saying is because honestly through no fault of their own, because they're just trying to survive in the same misogynistic and patriarchal universe that the rest of us are. They have taken that to mean that they need to knock down other women in order to lift themselves up. So they need to distance themselves from the inherent wrongness of their gender to be able to do that.
mm, maybe. I mean, that's your perspective, but to me, I mean, again, this is something that you might disagree with, but I don't buy into much of I guess internet feminism, as they say. Uh, I, I don't really buy into the whole like after the '80s with Judith Butler and Gloria Steinem stuff, and I definitely do not subscribe to whatever notion, whatever that counts as feminism in today's world. Uh, because these ideas are not are it the notion that you put down other women is it's just a human competition, really. Like in the men's world, and men would outcompete each other by basically being good at sports and beating up the nerds. I mean, there is such a thing as toxic masculinity, as you say, as is the phrase du jour. But there's also such a thing as toxic femininity, and in Reddit, there are both the quote unquote nice guys and nice girls subreddit that meant to mock all those things. But um, to me, I just explain it by different things. Just that I think it's just that people being awful, and not I don't use multi-syllabic words like you to explain all that. So perhaps that is another one of our disagreements.
I mean, the thing, like the difference between like your description of men trying to compete with each other and the
Hmm.
difference between that and internalized misogyny is that men are trying to compete with each other by overperforming masculinity. Like they are embodying masculine values supposedly of like athletic ability and sexual competence and like hyper masculinity, and that's how you out,
Oops.
as you said, like what was it, like beating up the nerds, and what was the other things, like playing lots of
Being
sports,
really good at sports.
being really good at sports. Like the men who are doing that are trying to like outcompete their male peers by doing traditional masculinity better. On the other side of it, like the women who say I'm not like other girls aren't
Hmm.
trying to overperform femininity. They're trying to distance themselves from the very concept of femininity. Like generally the people who say I'm not like other girls are generally the women who have less stereotypically feminine traits, whether that's their interests or their appearance or their style of dress. Like
Hmm.
they are clinging to this notion that being less feminine is somehow more valid.
Hmm. Yeah, I do think that there needs to be like an expanded, the definition of what it means to be masculine and feminine should be expanded. Like there's no one way to be masculine and there's no one way to be feminine. And it reminds me of a column that was written by one of my favorite. Well, you can call him a journalist, but I call him a columnist. His name is Andrew Sullivan, and you are going to really like him because he's a British man who moved to America, and he basically started. He basically pioneered both the form of internet blogging and gay rights. He is a gay man. There's this remarkable story that he recounted of how he got contracted with the AIDS virus, and he and it took him quite a while to be immigrated into the country of the United States, and how he lived through all of that, and he witnessed that as his friends and peers pass away because of AIDS, and he how he survived it. There's a recent column written by him, Andrew Sullivan, that recounted his days as a kid, and I think it was in, and he was a pretty like, scrunchy kid, and he's not the sporty one, and he's often get bullied and abused by the sporting kids, um, and he recounted also his dad who's who really enjoys painting, and and all throughout his life. So he Andrew Sullivan knew that he was gay, and um, he was as a kid. I believe he was rather ashamed of it, and his dad also was ashamed of the fact that he's a guy and he paints. And decades later, when they met up, and his dad confessed to him that he he felt this shame about being a guy and being able to paint, and I thought about it a lot because as a kid I was not remotely attracted to all of the things that my other male peers do, and they are not attracted by what I do either. I mean, and I was often a victim of bullying as a result, and this is obviously came down to the fact that the the male peers that I have that surrounded me. Sorry, and they are part of the reason why I have so many bad memories here out there. They had a conception of what it means to be a male, and it was either it was either imposed upon them by their parents or the social norms of the day, or by mass culture. They feel that they felt that they had to live up to this ideal, and on the way you know they they make life pretty bad for people like me, the same way as Andrew Sullivan's dad felt that he had to live up to this ideal of masculinity that didn't involve painting.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's exactly what toxic masculinity is. Like, it hurts men just as much, if not more, as it hurts women. And I think like masculinity in general is policed, especially at a young age, often more and more severely than femininity is produced. I mean, parents will pat themselves on the back for letting their daughter play with like trucks or whatever, but a little boy with a doll is still an affront to society in a lot of ways.
Mhm. Yeah. I obviously you have some suggestions on what can be done, and I presume that you've written about these things quite a bit.
Yeah, I have. I used to write for a publication called Victoria Pink Pages, which was a queer news resource out on the West Coast that a friend of mine was involved in. So I did some book reviews there and some general articles there. That was a couple of years ago now, but that's where the bulk of my writing on the topic professionally came from.
Mhm. And one other thing too, in that Um, since we're talking about entertainment and culture, of course, I grew up with the conception that there are things that are made for boys that is automatically assumed to be made for everyone, but the things that are made for girls are only made for girls.
Yeah,
And
the male experience is universal and the female experience is specialized. Like, not to turn everything back to Harry Potter, but that's why J.K. Rowling goes by her initials, or at least because like her publishers told her that a book written by a woman would come across as being for girls. And I
and
mean,
also
we're
yeah, and also the author George Eliot,
mhm.
who was a woman who wrote Middlemarch. She went by George Eliot. Yeah, I forgot what her real name was, but I remember. I think the moment that I really like, I guess, bridged that gap was when I listened to Taylor Swift. I don't remember. I think it was either that song, "I Knew You Were Trouble When You Walk In," and
Mhm.
I thought, well, I'd like to listen to that again.
Yeah, I mean, I was never super like I was never a hardcore Swiftie in the way that some people that I knew were, but
Mhm.
like her music is very catchy. And
Yes, yes, but I'm not that big of a Taylor Swift fan that as other people I know. In fact, I interviewed someone who's a photographer from Los Angeles who's like a staunch Swift fan and defender. But yeah, I remember it because I you know I'm because I it dawned on me that entertainments that are quote unquote made for girls can be really good and aesthetically pleasing and emotionally resonating. And even though obviously I'm not a girl, and I'm not really part of the world of women, I can sort of understand in part what was being expressed. Like in and that I think is a power of art and narrative and storytelling. It for a moment there, as you say, open a book or as you read as you watch a film, you are temporarily inserted into the character's world through the vantage point of the protagonist, or in some cases, the anti-protagonist, and you get a glimpse of what the world is like uh, without having the vantage point of yourself.
yeah, no, I mean, like there's like women are expected to relate to male characters and to identify with male characters just as a matter of course. I mean, again, Harry Potter, like if Harry Potter had been Harriet Potter, it would have been marketed only to girls and it would have been a girl's book.
Mhm.
But like I was not the only girl that I knew that very much saw themselves like related to Harry and saw themselves in the protagonist's role. And that was just an easy thing to do. Like girls and women are expected to relate to boys and men, but boys and men seem to have a harder time usually of relating to girls and women and and seeing themselves in that struggle. One of the more recent examples was the Wonder Woman movie from a few years ago.
Mhm.
I remember coming out of it thinking like, is this what men feel like when they come out of superhero movies all the time? Like that you can just do anything? Because that's what I felt like coming out of Wonder Woman.
Yeah, I felt like they torpedoed the ending there. I know that the director Patty Jenkins made a better movie. I know that that movie Monster.
Mhm.
Yeah, the starring Charlize Theron as Eileen Wuornos, and she won an Oscar for it, which is well deserved. Yeah, I do feel like that Wonder Woman movie they sort of torpedoed the ending because I think it was Chris Pine that there's that thing that he explained to Wonder Woman that it's not war is not really caused by a mastermind or anything. It's just humans being humans. We have our avarice and we have our aggression, and then she sort of like understood it. But then later on, there was this British guy. I think he was played by David Thewlis, and
Mhm.
he revealed himself to be the god of war. And I
I've been
thought
yeah,
that's
the mastermind, the literal
a
god of war.
cop out.
I
Um,
mean, in terms of the technical merits of the movie, I mean, it has probably as many flaws as any blockbuster superhero movie does, which
mhm,
are probably higher than average for blockbuster movies.
mhm,
But like just in concept, the concept of a female superhero,
mhm.
like there was all this uproar at the time, just as there is when they're with the new Ghostbusters movie
Yes,
or
I was going to
Mad
mention that. Oh
Max
my god.
or any time a woman does something in a movie, especially if it's a sci-fi or fantasy property, men tend to have an issue with it.
Well, not all of them, just maybe the ones that are, more accustomed to, again, uh, their, their expectations and such. I think I've always thought that the solution is not to, make more movies where women are the lead. It's to quantity over quality. Um, it's and also I find that it's very tedious when say um, they create a female version of an already existing popular male character, like say Supergirl or the female Ghostbusters. I find the solution is to create, you know, good, identifiable characters, male or female,
Yeah,
and
I mean, there's something to be said for like why is the only way you can do a female-led movie if you like cannibalize something that already existed, and like women absolutely should have their own original roles. But at the same time, I mean, we live in a culture where practically every movie is either a sequel, a reboot, or an adaptation.
Mhm.
So when we're already seeing a dearth of original content in movies anyway, I think it's just a logical progression that we're going to see remakes like that.
Hmm.
And I mean, I don't have a problem with it. I thought the new Ghostbusters was great. It was a blast. It does, like, not every movie needs to be a masterpiece of art in order to like have merit. Sometimes movies can just be a fun time.
Mhm. Yeah. Which brings me to like how how say the black people in America. Here's a controversial opinion. I don't like the term African American because it's rather pretentious and long, and it's rather misleading. I mean, for the most part, black suffices, and a lot of people who are black share this opinion. Um, there's a subgenre of films that came out in the 60s and 70s called black exploitation. It's
Familiar? Yep.
it's these are really like these are not meant to be like great art in any ways. Like if you watch the film Dolomite, it's very schlocky, and it's charming in how not great art it is. Like these people aren't looking to do a masterpiece. They, for the most part, they wish to see themselves on the screen, and of course that goes with the representation thing. And in time, I mean, women picked that up too, and it it paid off in some parts, and of course there's that issue of how do we outgrow this cultural norms that are existing, because norms, unlike laws, are not perfectly rational, and people get stuck with them, uh, and they
Specifically about like the nature of movies being sequels, adaptations, and reboots.
oh yes, I mean that is obviously for the purpose of making money.
Yeah, I mean, basically everything comes back to capitalism, but like they're like it's happening now because it's easy. I mean, the
Mhm.
attention economy is such that like people don't want to spend the emotional and mental energy it's going to take to get invested in a thing they're not already familiar with. So like all you have to do is slap a logo somebody recognizes on your property, and you have a guaranteed audience right away. So I from a capitalistic standpoint, I understand why they're doing it. I'm hoping we're going to grow out of that at some point. Like as long as the dead horse keeps spitting out money, they'll keep beating it.
Hmm.
Yeah, I can only hope we grow out of that at some point though, because like it definitely gets tedious.
Mhm. Yeah. So as a as a person who didn't grow up in a capitalistic economy, and this is something that this is a pet peeve that I find with the people that I go to school with, and that they use the word capitalism as a dirty word. Well, I I just don't think so because yeah, Winston Churchill, the prime minister of former prime minister of England, um, great guy, very flawed human being, but great guy. He is, he has valuable historical contributions. He said that democracy is the worst system of government that has ever been made, except for all the ones that came before it.
Mhm.
I have the same view with capitalism. It's the worst economic system ever created, except for all the ones that came before it, and even after it, if you count socialism and everything. Um, I have no doubt that in 200 years' time, there's going to be a better form of maintaining economic and social cohesion. But for now, one should not decry a system that does work for not really everyone, but the largest number of people. And
I
one
think we're
should
seeing
come.
I think we're seeing more and more that it's working for a smaller and smaller number of people.
I know that because of the economic crisis and whatnot, and it feels like the concentration of wealth and everything. Um, but there's an expression, right? Not to throw the baby with the bathwater. I know that some of the very people seems to have a conception of how awful capitalism is, in in some of the greatest things, some of the greatest intellectual properties have come about because of it. Like scientific progression cannot grow a under a system where you are not compensated for coming up with that idea, and businesses could not thrive in such a system where your investment uh, are not paid off in some way.
Yeah, and I don't think anyone in a modern sense, and certainly in a modern Western sense, is arguing that like the best thing that could happen to us is the kind of economy that you're describing, where whether there's communist or socialist influences, like there nobody in especially North America is trying to promote a system or thinks a system like that would actually work,
Mhm.
where some business there's no incentive for profit, there's no incentive for innovation. Like the problem though with capitalism as a system as it exists currently is that I think to say, well, we have to keep it because it inspired all of these great things, I think has a lack of perspective there in terms of how it works and who it affects currently. Like capitalism is working for a smaller and smaller number of people, but it's working better and better for those people. And there's this notion that, oh, if we give tax cuts to the rich, then they'll hire more employees and they'll give people raises. Like the evidence has shown that they don't do that. They just buy super yachts and then store what's left in offshore accounts. Like trickle down economics has proven to not be effective. So I think just trusting that the rich will do what's right by everybody else is a system that's only going to engender more concentration of wealth and more the rich get richer and richer while the poor get poorer and poorer.
Mm, yes, I've gradually learned that the whole like the rich get richer and everything. it's not really a product of capitalism, because in other forms of economic economic production, that happened too, in feudalism, in definitely
Oh yeah,
socialism.
I mean,
Uh,
capitalism is an extension of feudalism, though.
mm, I don't buy into that notion, unfortunately, because in essence is a system of voluntary exchange, and the whole notion of those who have more gain more is it's a principle of human nature. It's called the Matthew effect. It's from the book of Matthew in the Bible. Like, for the to those who have more shall they gain, and to those who have not, then more shall they they lose. And it is a rather obviously tragic fact of human nature, and of course capitalism as a facet of human nature. I think it actually reflects human nature in the best way possible. It gives people the freedom to spend their money and earn their money in in various ways that they want. But because because people are free to do whatever they want, not every one of them would do uh, the the best thing, or either
Yeah,
for
but that
themselves
sets
or
up poverty as a personal and moral failure, though. Like, by that logic, anyone who is poor is just because they didn't work hard enough, or they didn't choose the right career, or they didn't, like, they just didn't want to. Like, that is not the reason why people are poor.
no.
Like,
I don't think that's the case either. Obviously there are people who are wealthy who are assholes, and who neither you or I would associate with. But so do so is the case for people who are not wealthy, and there's
oh yeah, like
a
it's not a question of like your immediate personality, although I do think an overabundance of wealth does generally create more assholes than it eliminates, just because people like wealth gives you power, and people with power tend to let that go to their heads. But like, wealth as a sign of your personality, like I don't know that necessarily asshole was the term I would use, but like there are people who like worked harder than everybody else and tried harder than everyone else and made the right choices and did everything they could, and they either were unlucky, or what's more likely usually is that they weren't born to the right people. Like, a lot of the capitalists who consider themselves self-made men were born to wealthy families, and like it doesn't make you a self-made man to have received a small loan of $1 million from your father.
um, I know that statistically, those who are middle class gets a better chance to be, in the top 1% than, say, the poor to end up in middle class. Um, that is obviously not good. But I would say that I would say that the difference lies in values, and it. I don't want it to be misconstrued as a, you know, um, the those who are poor because of their own fault. But what I'm trying to say is that there is there are ways in which people who are not wealthy to obviously learn the values of middle class people, because they they obviously they have these certain things. They did make choices that enabled them to be to to move upwards. And of course you return to this notion of upward mobility, and obviously luck plays a role, but for the most part it's not really about working the hardest as you can, but making making the right choices, and they
Yeah,
paid
well,
off.
that comes down a lot to like that is American capitalism, and that is the American dream, quote unquote, is that if you just work hard enough, if you pull yourself up by your bootstraps, then you will achieve success. And like that's what de Tocqueville talked about when he talked about equality of conditions. Like, it was not that everyone in America was was of the same circumstances. He saw it as like their ability to like achieve the same circumstances at each other, and like, and every American has the same ability to achieve wealth, which may have been true in his time, is certainly not true now. Like,
Who are you
there's
talking about again? Who are you referring to?
Alexis de Tocqueville. He
Oh,
was
right.
yeah.
People way poorer in Tokyo's life. So I think.
Oh yeah, there's a whole different, like, there's a difference of scale um in terms of like just how inflation works, and how economies work. But specifically in terms of modern America, like, there's this notion that like everyone has the same opportunity to become a billionaire, say. Like,
I don't
a
think that's the
billion dollar
case.
it's totally not the case. Like, $1 billion is an unfathomable amount of money.
And I don't
um
think that everyone wants to be a billionaire either. There are people who are highly ambitious and, perhaps morally unscrupulous that wants to have,
yeah,
that much.
$1 billion is an obscene amount of money, and like, billionaires should not exist because it's not possible to become a billionaire without being directly responsible for at least a handful of deaths. Like, if you're a billionaire, it's because you didn't pay your laborers enough. You used exploitative conditions in overseas markets. Like, it is not possible to become a billionaire, I think, without being like having enough negative impact on society that you don't deserve to be a billionaire. Like, no, and nobody needs that much money. Like, nobody's saying that like nobody should be allowed to be wealthy or nobody should be allowed to have disposable income. But like, there's a big difference between having the ability to afford like a second house or a boat, or just, yeah, having disposable income, and having the kind of like obscene amount of wealth that like Jeff Bezos has.
Mhm.
Like, that's the point where I think your money, like, that's when an 100% tax would not go amiss when people are making $1 billion.
Yeah. I think I'm glad that we get to, I guess, disagree in a civil manner, and I think that's one of the purposes of why I create these dialogues to begin with. I like to hear from different perspectives than my own, and I hopefully I would get to, present them with a different perspective, aka mine or anyone else's, to not really to change their minds, but to get them to see things from a different point of view. And again, that goes back to narrative and storytelling. Um, I think what we disagree on centrally is that there there's a you seem to emphasize this thing of need, and I have a to me at least, need is a very subjective thing. Of course, we can assume that as people we obviously need a basic nutrition and shelter and whatnot. But anything that's after that is just a matter of want. And people's wants are boundless. And I think that as long as you don't really harm anyone, you can do whatever you want.
And see,
Even
that's where I think the division comes, because I think, like, to my earlier point, it's not possible to make $1 billion without harming someone.
hmm, yeah, not if you ask a billion people for $1. That I think that's the only way you can do that.
I
Um,
mean, if that works for you, you're probably a better salesperson than I am. If you can get 1 billion people to voluntarily hand over $1, then fill your boots.
I actually think that uh, the billionaires, rather than being a manifestation of capitalism, I think they actually are doing harm to it because uh, you know when it comes to, say, e-commerce, you think of Amazon, and I mean I do use it, but they the relative gigantic scale that Amazon has actually hampers competition because the the next startup that wants to do e-commerce has to compete with that. And
100%. And that's the self-defeating nature of capitalism, is that everything, like the entire entertainment world is owned by Disney. So how can anyone who's not Disney compete? Like there's a few, there's a few people who have certainly made attempts, but when, excuse me, when Disney owns absolutely everything, or when Nestle owns absolutely everything, or any of the other 5 to 10 corporations that own basically our entire lives, like that's not free choice. That's not a free market when I can choose between this, like I can choose between this Nestle product or this other Nestle product.
mhm, yeah, there are people who believe that we are entering the next Gilded Age. I mean, it was the Gilded Age refers to that time when there are companies like Standard Oil who basically monopolize the oil industry. And I still maintain the fact that, uh, obviously um, I mean, I would concede that capitalism itself may have provided the conditions for monopolies the same way as, say, networks like social media, like Facebook, breeds fake news and extreme views. But then again, I would just refer to the don't throw away the baby with the bathwater. We, maybe it's just a silly thing. Maybe I'm in the minority opinion here, but I still believe in, of course, the liberties and even the power to reduce poverty that a system of a functional system of free market and free choice um, can bring about. And like I said, there's always a chance to build a better system. People, and there's a thing called the Flynn effect. I believe that's called the Flynn effect. That says that the wealthier a country gets, the more it spends on social programs. So social programs cannot really exist if a country isn't wealthy in the first place, or at least it would exist in a not so very stable form.
Oh yeah, I mean the ability to have social programs speaks to a an economy and a GDP and a like government wealth. In order to promote these programs, the government's got to have the money in the first place. So it certainly does speak to a certain level of privilege from an economic standpoint, that like you're obviously not in survival mode if you have enough money and your country has enough money that these programs are something that is even allowed to exist. And certainly there are a lot of flaws with the way the way government programs are run and the bureaucracy of it and the
Oh yes,
effectiveness of it.
oh
But
yes.
I think if the free market was going to have a measurable impact on poverty reduction, it would have done so already, and it hasn't.
I I I I I think it has. Um, Actually, there's a book that I'm reading right now, which is very valuable. It's called "The Better Angels of Our Nature" by Steven Pinker. I don't know if you've heard of him. He's from Montreal. He teaches at Harvard now, but he is Canadian. The book was written in 2011, and it listed all of the ways that not just the decline of violence, not just that violence has declined, but the every measurable things that are considered negative to human society, like poverty, has declined. And um, trade is one of the factors because it actually reduces the likelihood of war between two countries because you can't really go to war with a country that you are dependent upon it for trade. And democracy is too, because there's a rule that no two democracies ever go to war with each other. That's at least after 1945. And I'm I do find his argument believable. I would recommend that book too. But it it is empirically true that the world is very much less poor than it was And even in places where people would perceive as poor, like say Africa. I mean, I was raised with these weird stories about like how Africa is the poor continent. Even they have had rising middle class rates, and so does China in a very unprecedented way. Even though they don't really practice capitalism in its purest form. So yeah, uh,
I mean, I'm not sure what the definition of pure form capitalism even really is. I mean, there tends to be this notion that like either and either you do capitalism the way the US does capitalism, or you're a commie and there's no in between, which I
mm,
don't necessarily think is the case. I mean, that
me
was
neither.
like
Me
that's
neither. Yeah.
that's largely what the Red Scare was, is the fear that if any country in a region went communist, then everyone else would follow, and we would either live in an American capitalist utopia or a Soviet communist hellscape, and one day the entire world would be like that. And I think like that's that's how we think about a lot of conflicts now. Like that's how we think about, for example, like any conflicts with Islam. Like if you look at 9/11, it wasn't just one particular group of terrorists that needed to be rooted out. It was the entire religion of Islam.
Mm,
And
um,
there was this idea that like either either we continue to live our lives as in terms of American Christianity, or the entire world will be subject to Islam. And that's like that's never been the case. It was never going to be the case. And yet that's how we think about war and conflict and people who live lives differently than we do.
yeah, and obviously, boiling things down to simple dichotomies is how do you get people to, I think, how they claim people would understand things. And um, I think that obviously the better ways is to get people to under, understand things in a more nuanced fashion. And again, this is uh, this
But we
is a
all
function
communicate.
of
Oh, go ahead.
narrative of storytelling. Um, I don't know. I think when it comes to what I would call functional, or at least not really pure capitalism. I mean, Milton Friedman defined it pretty well, and obviously people always gravitate towards Adam Smith. Uh, so uh, those are a forms of capitalism that are functional, and I've always have a of course I was sort of inspired by the I find some of the period of the 1950s in America where Hollywood people are being blacklisted, like incredibly
Mhm.
scary. Like it was a time when you cannot really hold two thoughts at the same time. One is that communism is bad. It is bad, and it and it subjugates people, as well as saying the communists, they are American citizens, so they deserve to have their First Amendment rights. Most people do not hold two beliefs at the same time, and that results in the awful blacklisting of multiple Hollywood people. And it was sort of like dramatized in that Arthur Miller play, The Crucible, in
Mhm.
which the Salem witch trials is being paralleled with the 50s McCarthyist trials. Um, and in terms of Islam, it's not a religion that I really want to follow. Um, but uh, in the the Western world, at least, was sort of like reintroduced to Islam in such an importune moment, like the September 11 attacks. Like we should have really learned about that religion sooner, because here's
Yeah,
the
I mean,
thing.
like that wasn't the first time that Islam had existed in specifically the US. Like
No,
there's millions of Muslims in the US, and there were before 9/11 ever happened. It's more specifically, my point is to that the tendency to generalize and to like to assume that any person who does something bad is a representative of the entirety of whatever group they happen to belong to. It's the same reason why, I mean, to relate it back to female-led movies, any if any female-led movie is good or bad, like if it's bad, that's an indictment of every female-led movie ever. Whereas like movies led by men, specifically superhero movies, like any one movie is allowed to suck without anyone taking that as an indicator that the entire genre is going to suck.
Mhm. Yeah, obviously, generalization is a barrier to nuanced thinking, and it led people to believe in stereotypes. And I think I've seen people of all stripes who have this idea of a person without knowing them, and that guy Daryl Davis. He's a musician. This is the first moment in the entire conversation where we talk about music. But he's a musician, but he's better known for sort of like talking people in the Ku Klux Klan out of being Ku Klux Klan members. He has done that with over 200 people at this point, and he never really, if you hear him, if you hear him in interviews, he never really proclaimed that he wants to, deprogram these guys. He really just wants to have an answer to the question, how can you hate me without knowing me? And I think that by some extension, I asked myself that question too when I was in my school days. Why do you see me as this other? Why do you beat me up? And why do you use harsh words on me without understanding what I'm about and all that? And and I vow to never I vowed to never do that. I vowed to never hate someone or something without really understanding it. Of course, I made that mistake with 50 Shades of Grey, the series. Um, but I think that every one of us can make that mistake of, you know, hating
It's a very
someone.
easy thing to do. I mean, like we're inclined to stereotypical thinking and to overgeneralization as like as a survival instinct of our like cave dwelling days. But
Hmm.
like I like to hope that we like the rational mind has evolved past that, but it's still a very human instinct to think on those terms.
Hmm. Yeah, and it does bring me back to that this Pinker book because the chapters 8 and 9 of the book he details one of the inner demons of humans and also the better angels of human nature, and he contrasts that with he does the central thesis is that he says that even though we've made this much progress, there are these things that can hinder progress. He calls them the inner demons of human nature. And of course, they can manifest themselves in, say, bad systems or corruptions of uh, good systems or social norms that exclude people. But he also talks about these better angels that makes human refrain from prejudice or, you know, uh, inflicting violence upon people who they see as their outgroup. And he believes that even though it's very hard to practice these better natures because the human has because the human mind has its rational as well as its less than rational capabilities. He thinks that there's some ways that we can overcome those the bad the bad things that we have, even though we should really recognize them as part of human nature. And I'm I'm looking at a quotation by David Hume, Scottish Enlightenment philosopher. It says that it cannot be disputed that there is some benevolence, however small, infused into our bosom, some spark of friendship for humankind, some particle of the dove kneaded into our frame, along with the elements of the wolf and serpent. Let these generous sentiments be supposed ever so weak. Let them be insufficient to move even a hand or finger of our body. They must still direct the determinations of our mind, and where everything else is equal, produce a cool preference of what is useful and serviceable to mankind above what is pernicious and dangerous. This is from an inquiry concerning the principles of morals. And I feel like I've talked for too long, so I'm going to finish my point here. And I believe we're at the end of our time, so I would leave you with the privilege of finishing up this conversation that we've had, which I'm very much enjoying.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting point. I mean, I do believe that humanity is fundamentally good, as much as they like to try and convince me otherwise sometimes. And it's very easy to like just like we're genetically and historically and evolutionarily predisposed to stereotypes, we are to focusing on the negative. We are to like if you're in a field of flowers or that has a lion in it that's about to eat you, are you going to focus on the beautiful flowers or are you going to focus on the lion? That's a bit of a simplification, but we are like it's so easy to focus on all of the bad things and all of the flaws and all of the ways that we wish we'd done better. And I mean, I struggle with that myself a lot. So I do think if we're going to leave it there, the notion that humanity is fundamentally good and to look for the best wherever we can find it is a good place to end it.
Awesome. Thank you, Madison, for coming on to the show.
Yeah,
This
thanks for
has
having
been
me.
really fun. Yeah. And do take care.
Yeah, enjoy the rest of your weekend.